I talked also this morning about soulmates and how there can be some surprises with soulmates, because typically what someone is looking for is your better half, that other person who's just going to be your companion. And that I have found several times that soulmate might actually be your uncle. And they're playing a different role, and you're not supposed to be in a romantic relationship with your soulmate this time because you've already done that. And now, as far as love is concerned, I've got to break it to you all. Some bad news. Spirit doesn't necessarily want a happily ever after story. Just a messenger.
Why not?
Because learning is more important. Happiness, nice if you can get it. You can grow a bit with happiness, but learning is the bigger thing. Yeah. And especially when people have had their soulmate or have had really lovely past lives together, then like, okay, says the soul, been there, done that. Now what? I've been happy. I've had the, lovely, bliss for 50 years in our happy family and so forth. Done it. It's like, and the soul said, yep, you have done it. It's time for something else.
I was just wondering if we could choose to take a lifetime every now and then to be back in that happy state.
Oh, definitely.
For like
Definitely.
vacation or something.
Yeah, we can definitely choose that. In fact, we have free will. We can choose to go back to that soulmate experience and do it again and again. But then even the soul says, I'm getting a bit bored of this bliss. Yes.
So, is there no purpose without conflict? Is that kind of where you're going there?
No, because remember that the wedded bliss and the connection, very deep in love with someone else, is also part of the story. So you can have great times, and you can have wonderful times, and that's building up the light. It's building up the love. It's building up more of a positive, optimistic perspective. But then they say, don't forget the dark. It's not like through adversity shall you grow, but don't forget that there is storm, cold, blizzards, and that's also part of life.
So when you hear, I've got a debt to pay, didn't learn my lesson, next life, didn't learn my lesson, next life, didn't learn my lesson, keep going until you learn your lesson.
Exactly.
How does a blissful life correspond to that? Can you have 3 consecutive blissful lives and learn lessons? Or does it normally take a little conflict?
Yeah. Sometimes people have to learn the hard way, but there are people who can learn through love and spirit and light and optimism too. But sometimes they don't. But it does remind me of a particular type of life, and it's called the recreation life. And this is something when periodically when we get a little bit envious, looking at this other person that sometimes is on the tabloids, it's like, man, they got everything, good looking, got the money, like just how did they land that role, Well, from the Michael Newton perspective, as well as the life between life stuff, there are interventions from above in which souls can be in a downward spiral, and they are not getting out of it. They are getting stuck in negativity and self-destruction, and sometimes it's just like a narrow-minded stubbornness, spitefulness. And they say, time out, time out, we're going to give you a recreation life, so that you can experience love and beauty and aesthetics and constancy in a happy family life. Because with your plan, you are not going there. and that's truly a spiritual intervention. And I must admit, since I've learned about that, I'm less envious of those lucky, I'm not going to say it, those lucky people. You know, and why are they getting away with all this stuff? Maybe, you know, they really need it. Yes.
So that makes me think of walk-ins.
Mm-hmm. Walk-ins is what she was talking about. You know, I can say that Michael Newton was really against the idea of walk-ins.
What is that?
A walk-in, oh, it's when you get to a point where where a person gets more suicidal, and they say, you know, I'm finished with this, but the body's still good. So someone else can come in and use the body. I'm leaving, and another soul comes in. That's the idea of a walk-ins. And so, as I said, you know, we talked about that a lot in the Michael Newton Institute. And he was of the belief, after doing this for like 40 years, that he didn't believe that that happened because there was a lot of work that happened in the womb with the interaction of that soul integrating into the nervous system of a particular body. And it took some years to create this matrix, as it were. And to think that at some point you can just leave it and have someone else come in, he didn't think that could happen. I've only met two. They say they were walk-ins in my life. Maybe I've met more, I don't know. But this one fellow in San Francisco, he was a self-avowed walk-in, but he was his first soul was homosexual, and the second one was homosexual. You know, and I'm thinking, well, there's a lot of continuity from one to the next, you know, and you can probably, if you want, have a totally different orientation, but he did not. And I was a bit suspicious about that because he didn't really change that much. However, and this is getting a little bit to the top-down idea. We were talking about perceptions and psychological awarenesses of like how we perceive things and our personal conclusions about life. And if with a top-down perspective, then you have this idea of how things are, and then you look at it and say, oh, I was right. Which may not be true.
Sometimes I've heard this, that, for example, Peter Hurkos, who was a healer, he fell off a ladder and he became very psychic, and he became highly intuitive and healed people. That the explanation is that a higher dimension of your seeing soul comes in through you, but it's really you, but it's, you know, something deeper.
Oh, well, that's a variation of that. I hadn't heard of that one before. Yes.
I work with a lot of near-death experiencers, and one of my clients was brutally murdered, and her soul left, and another soul came in, and the new soul is incredibly troubled because she has no relationship to the past life. I would say that's the only real. I've heard of a number of experiencers feel that they're walk-ins, but none of them really exhibit a new soul in the body. Like this one.
Like this one, but
Yeah.
it's not very good. It's actually a
It's
troubled,
tormented. Yes.
tormented. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, that could also be just pure trauma
Mm-hmm.
too. Yeah, yeah. It's hard. I would have to, you know, work with more to come up with an idea.
Yeah, she has no relationship with her family, her husband, so she self-isolated after. Because she doesn't know these people.
Interesting. I had a very interesting experience of this woman in Central Europe, and she told me about her youth in which she was a fireball. She was just full of energy, and she would be climbing trees, and she would be getting into some fights with kids, and she was faster than those boys, and just full of energy. And then, like around age 6 or so, she got a fever, and it was just burning, and she was going to die. And it wasn't until later, you know, through my session that we found out what the inner mechanisms were. But she was just about to die. She had this terrible fever, and it was an extension of her fiery nature. Let's go out and do it. And then we discovered that she was born and brought in 60% of her soul energy into the body, which is a whole interesting concept right there. And that it was too much for this little body. And so they siphoned off like 20%, so then she had 40%. And she said that after that, of course the fever went away, her personality changed. She was a lot more agreeable. She was still, positive and let's do this, let's do that, but she wasn't like so aggressive. And so instead of like a walk-in, she just released some of that soul energy that was just too much for this earth body. But then, that brings up this whole idea that in spirit, our souls have got 100% of its energy, and it uses a bit of that to animate these bodies down below. And some to the extent that they can animate two bodies simultaneously. And that's called a twin flame. And animating both, and I've come across very few of them, but I have. And one reason for a twin flame is to burn off as much karma as soon as possible.
So are they in the same, are they in the same family or same group?
Do
they know each other?
I've had both experiences, where one was a brother and sister born in Switzerland, like in the 1500s, and they did it kind of like, the soul did it as an experiment to divide itself into brother and sister. And they were saying, well, how would that be? Because that's also part of free will. We can have these experimental lives, too. That's okay. But they wanted to find out, what would a life like this be? And they would think they conceptually thought, oh wow, we can probably like share things quicker, and we'd learn faster. But actually, the girl did much better than the boy, and she met a man, got married, had a family, and so she was completed within her family, and he was kind of drifting. He didn't find, because his focus is upon his sister. She was married, and he just got lost, and he died early, and so the soul considered it a bad experiment. Something that was interesting, but they wouldn't do again. Yeah. But I have had yet another fellow, and really interesting. He was definitely an advanced soul, because he brought in, the person I met had 20% of the energy, but he was like 6'6", a real like Teutonic type of fellow, very clever, very astute, international traveler, a photographer, multiple languages, and I think, this is 20%? He's a pretty awesome soul. But he also had a younger twin flame who was born over on the West Coast, that about 15 or 20 years younger than him. He hadn't met her, but he was curious and it'd be interesting to meet her.
Stephen, how do you find that out? Like,
Yeah, I
how
was
much-
curious.
How do you, does the soul tell you? I
The soul tells me.
While you're between lives?
That's right. Yeah, and it's a direct question. Very much like if you don't ask the question, you don't get the answer. So when I found out that was a possibility, I started asking more people. Like, so how much energy did you bring down to animate this self? And oftentimes it's like between 40 and 60%. But in that other case, like only 20% for this dynamo fellow. And so some souls, again, probably the older, larger, more experienced souls have just got a lot of energy, and they don't need a lot of their stuff, let's say, to animate a life, and they're still learning. Yes?
How do you respond to Gary Zukav's book, all those years ago, Seat of the Soul, when I remember he was one of Oprah's first guests when she added your spiritual moment to her show. And she said, "So Harry, what is the soul?" And he said, basically, Oprah, if you can imagine something so vast that 1,000 threads of it can be having simultaneous lives, you're not even close.
I think he was
How do you
probably
respond?
talking about soul with a big S. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Would you say more?
Yeah, that would be, closer to God. That's the all in one and one in all, and that is really vast. And yet, we also have spirit guides. We've got the elders, those on the council, and then we've got those angels and archangels. So there is a certain hierarchy of vastness, of wisdom, of the abilities that some of these souls can really be like almost omniscient, and they can be in many places at one time. Yeah, that's a very high level soul, but I think that they're relatively rare. They're closer to the Godhead, of course. They're probably teachers, and I think that there are, just like in many other ways, like our sun, as much as we like it, is a rather minor orb, a small star, and then there's vast stars, huge stars, galaxies elsewhere. So I think it's all possibilities are there. Yeah.
So, I think I may have missed a part at the beginning, but is this like a concept of the oversoul, like Jane Roberts, The Education of Oversoul 7, that there is that like each entity is an oversoul that manifests different lives at different times or simultaneously, like you're saying?
A variation of that. And again, like in my, I can't remember if I shared that, the soul that was just on her second lifetime. Did I share that here?
This morning.
That was morning, yeah. So there are some souls who just haven't been around very long. They're really quite young. And so I wouldn't even call them like an oversoul at that point. They're just like, young and learning and growing. And then one day, in 10,000 years, they will be probably closer to this oversoul idea. But as an analogy, I tend to think that our soul, and each of us has a soul in spirit, okay, that it has had many past lives. Let's say 10, okay, and that one soul with the 10 past lives, and here I am now today. It could be as an analogy that soul is our parent, and we upon the earth are like siblings. If we have some things in common because we've got the same parent, but we're having each of our own individual experiences. And so that's as close to this oversoul idea that I would probably go.
But when each of those siblings passes to the other side, they rejoin the oversoul, right?
That's right. They integrate to a certain extent,
Right.
but sometimes they are stuck inside their own persona. And there can be these, what I call bleed-throughs of a past life personality that is affecting your life today. And
Okay, but it's still, is that analogous to what we call our higher self?
no, the higher self is, yeah, the soul and the higher self is the
soul
same.
Yes,
Yeah.
but so that we would rejoin our higher self.
That's right. And remember that difference between the spirit and the soul, and that's always going to be part of the vast oneness. But it's the soul, when it learns its lessons and it incorporates all of the healing and wisdom, then it merges back into its pure soul or our higher self.
So it integrates all
That's right.
wisdom.
But there are actually quite a few times when a part of it remains separate and a bit stuck on the earth. And this opens up all the arenas of ghost stories. But there is, I'll call it baggage, from a past life, especially if it was very difficult. And it's kind of left here on the third dimension, on an earth plane area. And there'll be a time later on when you're reincarnated and you've got a package waiting for you. Yeah. COD.
How would those pieces come back together? I mean, you've heard of ghosts being in houses for hundreds of years.
That's right. That's right. Well, first of all, we have got free will. And so if we want to stay away from God for 300 years, we can do it. And but then there's also the sense that being stuck is an issue. Brooding, I have found, as a big issue with ghosts and ghost stories. And some of it can be just not believing what just happened, and why did I die like that? Or I didn't agree to this war, or that was unfair. And they're going to hold on to that. And the interesting thing is that you can hold on to these emotions after death. Wow. Yeah. The power that we have of the concentrated essence of our free will. Yeah. And I think Cayce also says one can turn your back on your maker. Yes.
One of the things I've learned from doing therapy is that when the mind gets angry, fearful, or guilty, it starts to be obsessive. And I think that's what carries over, that obsession that comes from anger, fear, or guilt.
Yes. Yeah, and that can grab a hold of a person beyond the grave. Yeah.
Can a soul be evil?
For a time.
No, I get anger, all these emotions, and those are temporary generally. So there's no longevity, like this soul is just evil no matter what body it goes into.
That's right.
Is there such a thing as that?
There is. And it's a wayward soul. It's a fallen angel. It is a person who can get so caught up in those negative emotions that they can spite their Lord. They can turn their back and have a period of time, but there's always going to be a time of redemption. There's going to be periodic opportunities to get over it, and but it can take lifetimes. Yeah. Yes.
Is the God or whatever, the oversoul, whatever you're calling it, is it ever affected by souls turning their back on him?
No. When they're up there, it's a bit like the parent taking a look at the kids and saying, "Oh man, wish you wouldn't do that." You're gonna feel sorry later. And they can try some tough love, but the kid's gonna learn what the kid's gonna learn.
A follow-up question on that has to do with this tremendous emphasis on learning. And the question has to do with the beginning, the creation of souls. Does this whole perspective allow for the possibility that in the creation, everything created was created perfect, just like the Creator, and it really didn't need anything to learn? It knows everything and is perfectly happy and loving and so on and so forth. So that actually this whole business of getting yourself in a situation where you need to learn is a result of breaking away, as it were, from your original creative perfection. And that really the whole purpose then is to return to the condition of perfection that you were originally created in.
Yeah. The great,
Could that fit in with all this?
indeed, the great cycle, coming back to
So
the
that when
original
you say
spirit.
that learning is the important thing, the learning is for the sake
Mhm.
of getting to the point where you want and accept that you're one with your creator and with everyone else.
Indeed.
So that would fit in with that too.
Yeah, yeah. And I think also on the early parts of that differentiation,
Mhm.
was the desire of each of the corpuscles in God to self-evolve, to become an individual, and to feel what it was like to indeed be unique. And from there, that could be a fabulous journey. And then sometimes we get like lost in dramas and issues and so forth. And remember, I also talked about the spirit and the soul.
Right.
So the spirit is indeed that oneness, that pure essence that is true everywhere, all places, and that is the animating spark within each and every one of us. And the more that we can tune in to the spirit within us, it's like tuning into just the right wavelength in which that's going to be where all the answers come from. Yeah. But it doesn't have the individuality. It doesn't have the individuation that each personality has. Yes.
Does that individuation supposedly in this theory meant to be eternal? Like something different than the original state?
Would you say 1,000,000 years is eternal?
No,
Yeah, no, then not.
no. So it's not meant to be eternal?
No, but it could be a long time.
But
Yeah.
a long time?
Yeah. Yeah, Sherry?
So did God make it this way so that she could experience life through all of us?
Exactly. Yeah.
How cool is that?
That is cool. That's cool. That's right. And imagine like all of the little cells that we have, with just to touch with, that's going back to our minds, and now expand that into God, and each one of us, we're all the individual cells sending our experiences, our likes, our loves, and french fries right back up to spirit.
I think that step a little bit further that I've enjoyed learning. God can't know everything until he knows your life. He doesn't know everything until
That's right,
he's
right.
experienced your life.
Exactly. Yeah. So all the self-awareness in the evolution in experience. Yeah.
I was always intrigued by, there's a Cayce reading about not necessarily experiencing the karma that you had, some negative karma that you had elicited from bad deeds in life, because you needed tools to overcome it. So you would have several more, or possibly just one more life that would give you the information or the knowledge that you would need to continue and overcome the bad karma.
Mm-hmm. And you're saying, or you're saying that Cayce said that there
There's a reading that explains that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it wouldn't be just like one life, but
so you
several.
wouldn't necessarily be zapped right back and
Yeah.
experience your evil karma.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. In fact, one technique that Michael Newton taught us all was to go back into the last life, and that's where we'd start the journey. And I found that wasn't necessarily where the soul needed to go. Going to the past relevant or significant past life. There's some juice over there, but there could be like a parallel or an important significant past life 2 lifetimes back, and that's the one that has more in common with Stephen today. And so that means more than the one that was just past. Yeah. In fact, there was one thing that I got from what I learned to be like the Warrior series or the Scholar series of lives. And I didn't know such a thing existed, that there could be a series of a theme, but I found out that, indeed that's what I was experiencing. I would go back, start off with a warrior life. You've heard about one of them. And then move over towards a scholarly life. You heard about that one too. And I would kind of like switch back and forth between these two extremes. But it was like a series. So all of these warrior lives boom, 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 with maybe a couple of other types of lives or themes or interests in between, but they weren't part of the Warrior series. So that's another interesting perspective that I have found, yes.
If I want to convince somebody that reincarnation is real, what kind of earthly facts can I give them?
Anyone?
Because everybody says,
Yeah. Well,
A lot of people use prodigies, example of prodigies.
Yeah, prodigies.
These youngsters that it's just, you cannot explain how they could have this talent of playing the
Exactly,
piano
like
or
Mozart,
whatever.
for instance, and
That's
others,
right.
where did that come from,
How do you explain
but
it?
those
You can't
people don't
explain it.
remember being Mozart,
But that's another thing, when, asking children, who are, before they really start thinking about, why am I making up this story? But Ian Stevenson, a researcher here at the University of Virginia, wrote several books about children and reincarnation, and finding that they had their stories, and they knew about the people, they knew about the dynamics and the special names. Where did they get that information? So these are some
There's very few people compared to the universe.
Yeah. Well, how many do you need to have proof?
There was,
A lot of people are very doubting Thomases.
Yes, indeed.
yeah, there was a special, and I think it was the History Channel, something reputable, but a woman who remembered where she lived in England and went back and found her children. And knew where she was buried and knew how she died, and it was a TV special.
Mhm.
She actually met her children.
That's cool. Yeah, yeah. And I was quite busy in, again, the German-speaking lands because a colleague of mine was on television. And she was doing similar work, and they had a very interesting concept with the television series. She would have the person, they would ask for as many specific historical facts as possible. Then they would take that person with a film crew, with a historian, with an archaeologist if needed be, and they would go to the location that they said that they were at, just to find out, to verify, is this true, And they had a successful series of shows about that, and enough to make her quite famous. Yes.
I hate to counter an idea that's been brought forth, but I've got to ask this. If God created space and time, he doesn't need to wait for anything to happen to know it. So therefore, he can be complete without my life being finished. Is that a wrong thought?
No, there's probably not any wrong thoughts, but
Incorrect?
well, first of all, I'd have to say I'm not even going to go close to what God thinks. I don't
Someone
know.
said earlier that because God can feel what we experience in our life,
Mhm.
therefore he gets to be a part of that.
Yeah, and that's
But
more of an
if he transcends time with future lives and future memories and so on, that time wouldn't be a barrier to him in having knowledge of a thing.
I would think being able to play with time like that would actually be a bonus, that as we can, let's say, dimly recollect that great holiday in the Caribbean, if you've got perfect memory and you go beyond time, you can relive that right now. That's even more of a spicier idea, of a God just totally, getting lots of billions and billions of impulses, of memories, of experiences, laughter, tears, all, the whole gamut of possibilities in our theatrical lives. And this is just one planet. I mean, it's pretty vast. Way beyond me.
It just sounds to me like the overcoming of conflict is hopefully eventually going to cleanse us all of our emotional baggage, and one day we'll just all be happy
Exactly.
somewhere in the universe.
Exactly. And I believe that it's such a long process that, we don't even have to worry about the end result of that. Perhaps even with the idea that we may be coming in waves, that here we are on our present wave and we're like learning, experiencing, sending our sensory data back up to the Godhead. And we're just one wave, and 500 years from now there's another wave floating through. It's so vast.
Just always in looking for purpose and reason
Mm-hmm.
in it.
Mm-hmm.
And many times when you see people in pain or in conflict, you question the purpose of that.
Exactly, right. And on some levels, it seems to be so needless to have these types of conflicts. And you look back on, like, 2 world wars. It's like, this is the Monday quarterback. It's like it could have been avoided. Had there been some more reasonable people, or had they talked it out or something. But it didn't, and it was such pain, such terrible stuff. Yeah, and the same thing happens in individual families when there's like dysfunctional pains and hurts and reactions within one small family, and it's like, too bad. It's just sad that has to happen. Yeah.
So I'm sorry to hog the conversation, but that sounds like these flesh bags that we're temporarily in don't account for much. It's just all about the souls.
Without the flesh bags, the soul's not picking up on the earth experiences.
Okay.
Yeah. Although I do have a couple of interesting things when just after death, how the departing soul described that life. And very poetic and very interesting. One said, there's the body down below. I will wear those clothes no more. Another one said, that life, that name has ended.
I'm still here.
Fabulous, huh? Yes.
You know Dolores Cannon?
Remind me.
Well, she did regression, she started.
Yes.
She's gone now. But one of her books was about the, so what my question is going to be, if you could count any of these, but the 3 waves, and what made her write that book was because there was a lot of souls coming for the first time for volunteers, and which was creating a lot of, once they got here, it's like, oh my gosh, why am I doing this? And they just committed suicide to get back, and depression because they couldn't handle what was going on here because they never experienced it. So she was having them come to her, and that's how she was learning about them. Have you encountered any of those?
We're talking about like social worker souls.
This was their first time here on Earth. They were volunteers to come to help.
Mm-hmm.
And so she was attracting these, and this is why she wrote that book, The 3 Waves of Souls Coming In. And it started back after World War II, and they was coming in, in groups, 3 waves. But on one of the waves were these first timers that volunteered to come. They were like close to the Godhead, and they volunteered to come in to help at our time now. So have you encountered any of those yourself?
I haven't encountered that specifically, but I have encountered the hybrid souls. And these are souls that have had experiences on other planets and sometimes other dimensions. And so they've had experiences, and then they come to the Earth for the first time. And, but they come in not like, this is my first time. It's like, no, I've got some experience elsewhere, and I'm bringing that in with me. And there is a disconnect between the two. And hybrid souls have also a tough time, and sometimes they go towards suicide because it's unpleasant, it's primitive, it's isolating here on the earth.
You've encountered hybrid souls?
Oh yeah, many.
They're like an animal in a person, or?
Banana balloon person?
No, an animal.
No.
That's a good way to get it. An animal and a soul, or an elf and a human, what kind?
As experiences on other planets? Yeah, there can be all kinds. In fact, one could even say that the most advanced animal of another planet could be like a dolphin. And that's the most advanced, and that experience and also the memories of being in a pod and swimming and so forth might actually come from that instead of being a dolphin here upon the earth. Yeah, and there's also these other souls that they had let's say they give themselves a reward for a life, and they want to take a break, they want to have a holiday, and so they say, I think I'll be a dolphin, or I'd like to be a bird flying in the sky. And that's not the same thing as being born as a dolphin, but they temporarily inhabit the body and the consciousness of an animal, a creature, just for sometimes a day, sometimes a week or something, just to feel what it's like, on their way out. Yeah. Do you have a question?
Yeah, you were discussing about the social worker soul.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a case manager, and I work with a lot of mental health clients. I'm noticing there's a real push for, they want understanding about the metaphysical. So I just wanted you to speak on more of a social worker soul.
Mm-hmm. In the larger spiritual world out there's all kinds of really specialized souls. And it's very interesting how they can work in their own unique ways. I've come across a nursery school soul, and she was up there, and she had all these little cute white balls, and they were bopping around, mostly kind of like white, and she was just tending them, these are really young souls, and so she was a nurse also in the present life, and she had a fondness for children, but that's what she did in spirit, so she was really helping them, tending them, caring for them. But I've also had some kind of what I would call some emergency medical technician souls. And when there is a crisis down here, like a mass shooting, or a plane goes down, or some other catastrophe, there's like these group of souls, and they kind of swoop in because there's a bunch of disoriented souls, some of them not knowing that they're even dead. And they're there to guide, to say, hey, it's okay, come this way, just to kind of an orientation kind of thing. And that would be similar to the social worker souls. Then we have got some escorts, and they are there kind of to fetch those who are lost as a ghost for a while. And they're very patient, they are understanding, they are coaxing, they are sitting with that other soul, and that the root word of therapist is sitting with. And so they're there patiently kind of holding the cosmic hand, to say, okay, no rush, but when you're ready, let's go.
Can one of those interventions of another soul change the contract of someone's soul purpose now, or soul contract? Can intervention actually change the contract?
You mean like creating a new contract or coming up with a new life mission purpose?
Or a new ending to the contract? Change the trajectory of it somehow?
Probably there could be a life review in which there would be an understanding, because oftentimes it's not like an agent comes down and here's a new contract for you that you can go off and go, but it's more like a wiser, loving soul, usually a soul that they already know, it's a spirit guide, and they say, did you learn your lessons? Do you understand what happened? What would you do different? It's really bringing it back to you. And are you finished with that? Yeah, are you ready to move on? Because again, we can be coaxed, we can get advice, we can get some guidance, but there is no like, this is what you're going to do now. Yeah. In fact, I have come across a couple of souls who were not talking with their spirit guide. And they chose a life without guidance. And they just went from one life, and within sometimes months, they found another body. But they were not checking in, and they did not do very well because they didn't get this higher guidance. They didn't get this sense of a compassion and understanding of, you did this and you should go that way. They're just like kind of a stubborn. It's like, well, In fact, one was kind of a spontaneous sort of thing. This was back in the mid-'80s, and I was working with a 12-year-old, and I don't often work with kids, but he was a very, in one sense, rather precocious, but also quite angry 12-year-old. I mean, this is before puberty. But really ready to duke it out, and it didn't take much to put him into a trance, to get him into a past life. And he was a Vietnam War soldier who hadn't died, but maybe less than a year before this boy was born. And he was out running in the jungle, being chased by the Kong, and he had this sense of life and death and you got to defend yourself. And he died, of course, young, maybe age 20. And he wasn't finished with life. So he immediately found himself another body and came back as this angry young boy who was like with this commando, dangerous, way of looking at the world, that he brought in as a bleed through from that unfinished life. He didn't check in with anybody. He did not get healed. He did not talk with his spirit guide. He just said, I'm not finished. I'm going to come right back here. And he did not do well. He was, as I said, he was an angry young boy. I kept in touch with his family, and I found out later that he got into carpentry, and so he was, working with tools and so forth, hammering those nails. And but he then got into drinking, and then he fell off the roof one time, lost his arm. And what's a carpenter going to do with one arm? He then killed himself, and he just didn't learn the lessons, and too quick. And again, we have the free will, we can choose, but it's best to check in with Mama, Papa, and the higher guidance.
Well, it seems like a lot of people don't check in.
I think you're onto something.
Stephen, people will say, you smile just like your mother. When I hear you speak, you're exactly like your grandfather.
Mm-hmm.
Just walk across the room, I see your uncle in you. And I think our personality would be like 100% of our soul, but that's not true. I would assume that we have these physiological parts of us that are not so, or yes or no?
Mhm. Well, you have to bow to genetics, and say that, yeah, there are some similarities that one has, even with those twins who were separated at birth, and then they meet each other, and they've got the same mannerisms. I mean, is that in your DNA? Evidently. So there's some things connected to that. But I have found, along with Michael Newton, that there are these neighbor souls who are having a parallel growth energy. And they're not in your soul group. They could be 1 or 2 pods away, but you two have got a lot in common. You're like doing a parallel sort of thing. And this is perhaps one reason why each of us perhaps have experienced that, oh, you remind me of my dentist, over in Indiana. How many of you, experienced that? You remind me of somebody. So I think that's one way of looking at that, which is indeed very interesting. And there's also a sense of, I think I got this from James Redfield, when he said that when you do meet someone that looks like someone that you know really well, you're supposed to talk to them. It's not a coincidence. It's not a chance meeting. You might like an idea inside your head. Oh, it's just like. Said no. Go up. Talk to that person, because very likely you're going to have an interesting exchange. Yeah, I found that interesting. This just goes on and on, huh? You can go in all sorts of directions. So there was a woman who in spirit had some signs that she would then meet a partner. And then I had a client of mine who, this is when I was living out in California, and he was looking for a new car. And a car, yeah, an automobile. And he was looking around, but his roommate was wanting to sell his white pickup truck. My client wasn't interested in a white pickup truck, but it was a good deal. And so he bought it. And then he took off on a conference down in Arizona, where it was really hot and sunny, as you might imagine. And so he borrowed someone's hat down there because he typically didn't wear hats. So here he was in Arizona in a white pickup truck and a hat. And if you had asked him like a month before or 5 years before, he would not have done that. But he met in this conference a woman, and they fell in love, and they had a nice relationship, and she confessed to him later that she was a cowgirl at heart, and that she recognized that in our modern world, the cowboy on the white steed with the cowboy hat may not come around very often. But a white pickup truck, and he has a hat, would do just fine.
But he was open to it.
It was a karmic relationship, and those were the signs. He had his own signs.
He was open to buying the truck and wearing the hat.
Just temporarily, and I'd have to say that I think within like 4 or 5 months he sold the truck. Didn't need the hat anymore, but he kept the girl.
It served its purpose.
It served a purpose. Yeah. So even sometimes those temporary things, it's like, I'm just like a fad or just doing it for a while. It's like, it might be part of the plan. So another perspective on karma And many times people believe that, you know, karma is just bad karma and we have to pay something. But karma is neutral, and we can have good karma and bad karma. We can have something heavy and we can have something quite positive. Because karma basically means action. And so where are we putting our actions? It can be for the good, it can be for the bad, it can be positive, it can be negative. And so in using karma actively, here is a recipe. Join a bowling league.
I don't think so.
And by that, through action, what we do, you join whatever, and then you do it, you practice it, you get better at it, you make friends while doing it, you're with like-minded people, and of course, bowling is a metaphor. But it's quite simple in one direction, in that as you are working with karma as action, even going to the gym, you're working with karma, because you are using your muscles, and as you put energy and time and experience into moving the body, going to the gym and so forth, you get stronger, you get more fit. That is a sign, a physical sign of karma. So in one sense, it's not so esoteric. It's something that one can be using here and now. And so those deeds that we get into, those kindnesses, those actions that we can do, is all about planting seeds and planting good karma. What we're used to, or what we hear about, of course, is some of those big tales, you know, like, oh, this is a karmic relationship, and boy, I've got to pay back that one. But you know, the golden rule is also following the positive karma. Many of us and many people involved with spirituality very likely have had past lives as nuns or monks. Mm-hmm. Who's going to confess? There we go. Yeah, quite a few. And pretty much all of them made the 3 vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience. Oh my goodness. For a lot of spiritual people on the path of these 3 things, oh, boy, we got some issues there, huh? You know, poverty, yes, well, those rich people, they're so evil, but I'd like to have a little bit of it. So this thing about money, possessions, and so forth can be a residue from vows made in another time, another place, another life. And we're still, because it is a vow, working out that now. Also with the chastity, well, I know those New Agers and some of those very spiritual people going to, you know, those Kama Sutra classes. They say, well, actually, you know, I know about that chastity thing, so let's try the other side, you know. And so there can be this, again, back with the money, then with sexuality, a little bit of guilt, but fascination. Money, same thing. And then we have obedience. It's like, oh, I'm supposed to obey, I'm supposed to be really good. Yes, yes, sir, no, ma'am. But at the same time, it's like, you know, it's like, oh, telling me what to do again. You know, I want to be independent. I've heard enough of that stuff. Reincarnated monks and nuns. So this is the power of vows. This is the power of saying something, especially repeating, and they had to repeat that all the time, as well as when there is an emotional charge behind a vow. And I have found that also, not only with these monks and nuns, but also at the tail end of a particular life that was rather difficult, and then they got to that point that they said, No more. That is it. Forget it. That's a vow packed by a strong emotional energy and what's going to happen in this life, but a reaction to that vow. And there's examples in which there was following the leader, and the leader led them into some stupidities. That might even happen today. But that past life personality said, I am finished with these authority figures. I mean, it was a disaster. And I should have listened to my own hunches, my own thoughts about the situation. No, I was just following the group. This time around, we've got a very independent person and is going to be questioning everything. How many independent people do we have here? I thought so. Yeah. Yeah. There was a client of mine who had a very bad scoliosis, and to the point where she had to have several operations. She had a hunchback, and she had a slew of boyfriends. And I said, well, how did you do that? She went back into a past life in which she was a Hindu temple dancer, and she was chosen at like 12 or 13 years old because she had the perfect body. The nice long fingers, legs, the perfect body for this temple dance that she had no interest in learning, but because of her body, she would be perfect at doing this honor to her local gods. So then she had to join the temple dance crew, and didn't like it, didn't do very well because she was a teenager and she didn't care. And the lecherous priest, who was also the teacher, made her practice and practice and practice, and then they had some tests before the big ceremonies and the ritual that you would present what you have done, because this is a very important ceremonial dance that's going to honor Shiva. The pressure was on. She didn't want to do it in the first place. This guy was like had other intentions, and she was in a very difficult situation. So she said, "Oh, this is my test day." I mean, she was, by the way, a great client because she was there. It wasn't like, oh, I see myself as it. No, she was the girl. She was the young temple dancer, and today was the test day. And the pressure was on, and she thinks, oh, I'm so nervous, I'm going to make a mistake. And she did make mistakes. She flunked the test. She was going to be punished. They went to the top of the tower. After he had her, he threw her off the tower. She hit the bottom, broke all the bones, and then she's reincarnated in this woman today with a difficult body, very psychic, very attuned, but she is free to do whatever she wants because she doesn't have that perfect body. That priest was her first husband, who was a refugee from Africa. And in her good heart, she said, oh yeah, the poor refugee. Not knowing behind it was that guy. So you can imagine the relationship did not go well. But they had a child. And but then he wanted to do kind of like the chieftain thing, and wanted to be the boss of the little tribe. And she was a Western woman, and that did not go very well. And besides, remember, she paid with her difficult body. She paid for like following the orders and being the good girl and trying the best she can. And so the thing that brought them together was all of the karma, that was like a magnet that they would meet again because it was so difficult. She did help him to get a green card. And then that was it, and then she moved on into another relationship. But she does exactly what she wants, and she's a very strong person. And so with her strong personality, she attracts a lot of guys. I had another client who enjoyed an affair in ancient Greece. He was a very charming orator, and he was a teacher. He did his own thing. He was a traveling teacher going to different Greek temples. Well, on a ship headed toward Italy, heading towards Rome, he met this young girl there, and she was betrothed to someone in Rome, and she didn't meet him, but it was like from wealthy family to wealthy family, and she was on her way to meet the groom. Well, you can imagine what happened, because he was a smooth-talking fellow. And they had a night together. The next day, she was devastated, totally ashamed, a ruin for her family, and she jumped off the ship and drowned. In this life, they meet, and he is a musician, and she was traveling around the United States, and she stopped in his town, and through a friend they met, and they fell in love and had this relationship, and for about a year or so, and then she got the urge to continue her trip. For some reason, she had to continue her trip. And so she left, met another fellow in California, and next thing she knows, she's in a relationship with him, said goodbye to the musician. He's heartbroken, but of course he was the orator. She was the woman on her way to her betrothed. She met this other fellow, and by that point I didn't know how the story went, but I understand later that they had a child together. So very likely they're supposed to be together, and the heartbroken musician, he would not have felt it if it had been a quick affair. He had to fall in love to feel the anguish, to feel the pain, and then she can leave. Yeah. So a karmic relationship, a dynamic, and there's probably like hundreds and thousands of similar stories, all behind what we seem to think happening with our families and friends. But it's always great and interesting to find the spiritual underpinnings behind all of this. Sometimes I think it's like, some of the Greek myths and legends, they're really onto something, because they explain things that, like rationally, what's happening here. And so I think every now and then of Cupid, with the arrow, and that's the only way I can think why these two people are together. It must have been Cupid. I mean, somebody was zapped, because what are they doing together? But the more that I understand this, the more that I understand about the spiritual dimensions of this, I go, there's probably a karmic relationship here. I'm sure that, they're learning something and paying something off, but it makes so much more sense. Yes?
Does karma mean that something is unfinished?
Sometimes karma is something unfinished, and sometimes it's a debt to be repaid. And sometimes it's also finishing something that did not go in the correct direction.
Direction.
Yeah, yeah. And, but oftentimes it is something that kind of pulls one into an old story. And they have to figure out exactly what it was in order to find that neutrality. And when I say neutrality, you know, like with electricity, we've got like a positive and a negative, you know. So it's neutral. It's not like an ethical judgment, but energy, as in positive and negative poles with an electrical charge. And so that's how I also perceive karma, you know, in kind of a mechanical sense, in like, let's bring things back to a nice balance. And a sign that you have finished your karma is that when you think about this person who used to push your buttons, but when you think about that person now, it's like, it's neutral. I can meet him, I don't have to meet him. You are finished with the karma. Yeah.
I've heard of national or cultural karma.
Oh, yeah.
Could we be suffering from that right now?
I believe so. Yeah, national or cultural karma. Yeah, that's so true. Yeah. In fact, you know, I was talking about the Europeans and the 2 world wars. They had, of course, colonial karma, imperialism, for hundreds of years. That was coming back, you know, as their cultural karma. And we're also having in this nation, whether that be with the African slaves or with the Native Americans, and I have found some interesting patterns specifically like with the Native Americans, in which we have, you know, think back, you know, cowboy times with, you know, the cowboys fighting the savages, right? Manifest destiny, and wiping out many tribes, many cultures. And then they're reborn, and they have switched, you know? And so we have got Native Americans who are looking in the mirror and saying, damn, I'm a Native American. I'm gonna go drink. Right, because they were the savages, and I look in the mirror and I see a savage. So it's a self-worth thing at this point, not from them today, but from that energy, that pointing your finger in a superior manner. You know, that's now here I am. You'll find some self-loathing homosexuals who do the same thing. You know, when they persecuted homosexuals in the past. Yeah. And then on the opposite side, I'm sure we've all met them, we have got some white-skinned Native Americans who are leading ceremonies, sweat lodges, rituals, and they are very much honoring the wisdom of Native Americans. But they happen to have white skin. Well, guess what they were in a past life?
What about the idea that the Confederate leaders have reincarnated during this time to finally win?
I have thought about that.
Interesting.
Yeah. And this particular Saturn-Pluto conjunction this year in Capricorn is pointing towards the authoritarians mixing together with kind of a mafia bunch, because that's Pluto and Saturn together. And yeah, it has occurred to me that, you know, we in our national karma here, are we getting ready for another civil war? You know, are the Confederates reincarnated and they are pissed off that they lost? I don't know. I'd have to like do probably like 10,000 or 100,000 regressions to find out, you know, like who are these people?
I do a lot of my Facebook friends from North Carolina.
I bet we'll find a pattern. But yeah, that's very much a possibility, and it does fit into what I had found in Europe, and I really did see that in Europe as karmic, national karmic chaos.
But how would that fit with the evolution of a group's karma, and then 200 years later, we thought slavery was wrong. Is there no benefit, no power to that overriding this group of Confederates who are coming back to advance the cause of slavery that, we for the most part say is wrong? I mean, is there no good there? Is there no power to that realization?
Oh yeah, definitely. And it's a little bit different than just plain voting. Where the majority who are saying like, hey, that is old, that is outworn, that is wrong, that is ethically, in the totally wrong direction, and we can outvote them. So that's one level of it. But and another is again, like they found in Germany, that the neo-Nazis are pretty much forbidden. So they kind of like change their outfits and do it, but it is on the law books that, you cannot be a Nazi. So I believe that ultimately it's like a conscious desire by a country to say, the buck stops here. That is it. No more. And periodically we see some memes that, we went through, a couple of world wars to fight the Nazis. I mean, or the Confederates. And what are we going to do? When does it stop? So I think it's kind of like the energies, probably the karma, because remember, there's been quite a few stories here where even after death, those strong-minded, brooding, emotional personalities were still holding on to what they knew was the truth, and they haven't let it go. And then we've got also the bleed-throughs from those personalities, all right in the conflicts, probably in the battlefield, and they're still like there. A part of them is still there. And so it's a cleanup thing, it's back to the social work thing, it's back to a group, like may we heal, may we grow, may we evolve in consciousness. And sometimes we have to help those lost brothers and sisters, to raise the vibration. I truly believe that probably in any country in the world today, you're going to find some Nazis. But you're just not supposed to give them any power. Do not give them the authority stick. Do not give them any, opportunities to rule, because you know what they're going to do. So we have to have it set up so that the people who are going to, create a train wreck should not be in charge.
Yeah.
And I think that's what Jesus was talking about when he said that the meek shall inherit the earth. And I don't think it's necessarily meek, but I think it's the those older, quiet, more thoughtful souls, the humble, the thoughtful, the circumspect. Those are the meek. And they should be in charge. Mhm.
Good.
Yeah. I think that might be a good note to bring this to a conclusion. You think? Yeah. Okay, good. Thanks, everyone.